simply cannot find her.
Maria?
She's missing from the Abbey again.
Perhaps we should have put a cowbell around her neck.
I have looked everywhere, in all of the usual places.
Considering that it's Maria, I suggest you look in someplace unusual.
In 19... There is a moment most people never think about when they watch The Sound of Music. They see the sweeping Austrian Alps, they hear Julie Andrews singing, and they feel that warm, familiar comfort that has made this film one of the most beloved in history. But here is what nobody tells you. Behind almost every iconic scene in that movie, something went terribly wrong. And for decades, the people involved were quietly told to keep their mouths shut. Some of it was embarrassing. Some of it was dangerous. And some of it was so absurd that even the most professional actors on that set simply could not hold themselves together. This is the story of what actually happened during the making of The Sound of Music. The parts the studio buried, the accidents they hoped you would forget, and the secrets that only started coming out when the cast grew old enough to stop caring what Hollywood thought. Let us start at the very beginning of the story, long before a single camera rolled in Salzburg. Most people assumed The Sound of Music was always destined to be a Hollywood film. It was not. The story of the Von Trapp family had already been told on screen twice in West Germany during the mid-1950s, and those films were massive hits across Europe. They were sentimental, simple, and deeply human. Exactly what post-war audiences needed. But when American studios got a look at them, the reaction was cold. Hollywood dismissed them as amateurish, overly soft, and too foreign for American tastes. The story might have stayed in Europe forever if a stage director named Vincent Donahue had not looked past all of that and seen the emotional core underneath. He believed it could work, but only if it was completely reimagined. Not as a film, but as a Broadway musical built around one of the biggest stars of that era. That decision set off a chain of events that would eventually pull Maria Von Trapp herself into the picture. And Maria, at the time, was about as far from Broadway as a person could possibly be. She was deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, doing missionary work, running clinics, teaching music to people in remote villages. She had sold the rights to her life story years earlier to German filmmakers for a one-time payment of $9,000, a deal she made without any legal representation, simply because she needed to support her family. She had no idea what was coming. When letters started arriving from a couple in America asking to bring her story to the stage, she did not read them. She tore them up. Broadway was simply not on her radar. It was only when she returned to the United States by ship and found someone waiting for her at the dock that things changed. That meeting, brief and almost accidental, gave the whole project a quiet green light, and everything that followed flowed from that one casual conversation. By the time 20th Century Fox was ready to turn the smash Broadway production into a film, the studio was in serious financial trouble. Their previous mega-production had gone so far over budget that it nearly collapsed the entire company. Buying the rights to The Sound of Music for over $1 million struck many people in the industry as reckless. But Fox pressed forward, and the first major challenge they faced had nothing to do with cameras or costumes. It had to do with casting. Finding the right Maria was not actually the problem. The role went to Julie Andrews, and that decision turned out to be one of the smartest in Hollywood history. But it almost did not happen the way people think. Andrews had already proven herself on Broadway, carrying audiences night after night with her extraordinary voice and natural warmth. When the time came to adapt her most famous stage role for the big screen, the studios passed her over entirely, deciding she was not cinematic enough. That rejection stung deeply. But while one door closed, director Robert Wise was looking for someone to anchor The Sound of Music, and an early preview of another film she had made convinced him immediately. He reportedly watched only a few minutes before deciding she was exactly what the project needed. Andrews accepted the role for a flat fee with no royalties attached. The studio did not believe the film would earn enough to make a back-end deal worth offering. That judgment would turn out to be one of the most expensive miscalculations in the history of cinema. Finding her co-star was a far messier process. The role of Captain Von Trapp went through a long and strange list of potential candidates before landing on Christopher Plummer. Sean Connery was considered. Richard Burton came up in conversations. None of them felt right for a story that required both emotional restraint and quiet warmth. Plummer, when he was finally approached, did not want the part either. He found the material too sweet, too polished, too far from the kind of serious dramatic work he wanted to be known for. He turned it down multiple times. It took a face-to-face conversation with Robert Wise in London, along with a promise that the character could be reshaped and given more complexity, to finally bring him on board. One of his conditions was that his character needed a genuinely moving musical moment, something that felt personal rather than theatrical. That conversation is the reason Edelweiss exists in the film. It was not a traditional Austrian folk song passed down through generations, as many viewers have assumed. It was written specifically for Plummer's character, designed to give the captain a quiet, emotionally honest moment that the actor felt he could actually believe in. None of that backstory prepared the cast or crew for what filming in Salzburg was actually going to be like. On paper, Austria in the summer of 1964 sounded like the perfect backdrop for a warm and uplifting musical. In reality, it was a logistical disaster from almost the first week. The production had budgeted 6 weeks for location shooting. It took nearly double that. 1964 turned out to be one of the wettest years the region had seen in a long time, and the crew found themselves sitting in damp costumes, watching rain fall on the meadows they needed to look golden and sunlit. More than 200 people, cast members, technicians, wardrobe staff, directors, assistants, were stranded in hotels, running up costs every single day while the weather refused to cooperate. For a studio already carrying enormous financial pressure from a previous production that had nearly bankrupted them, watching the budget on a cheerful musical balloon outward day after day was genuinely frightening. There were moments when people inside the production quietly wondered whether the film would survive. The famous opening sequence, which shows Julie Andrews twirling freely across a wide alpine meadow with the camera circling above her, is one of the most joyful images in the history of cinema. It has been imitated, referenced, and celebrated for decades. What it does not show is what Andrews actually experienced each time the helicopter came around for another pass. The aircraft needed to fly low enough to get the sweeping aerial perspective the director wanted. Every time it circled, the rotor wash hit Andrews like a wall, physically knocking her off her feet and pressing her flat into the grass. She got up, adjusted her clothes, composed herself, and went again. This happened repeatedly, far more times than should have been necessary for a single establishing shot. She later described the experience with characteristic humor, but there was nothing graceful about what she endured to make that 30 seconds of footage look effortless. The physical risks on set were not limited to the leading actress. During the filming of the boat scene on the lake, where the Von Trapp children tumble into the water, a situation developed that could have ended in genuine tragedy. The youngest child in the scene was 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played Little Gretel. Shortly before the cameras rolled, the crew informed Julie Andrews that the child did not know how to swim. A plan was quickly arranged. Andrews would position herself close enough to catch the girl the moment the boat tipped. But when the boat actually capsized, everything unfolded differently than expected. Andrews fell in the wrong direction. The child went under the surface. She went under a second time before someone else on set reacted quickly enough to pull her out. Kim Carruth swallowed enough water to become sick afterward, and the experience left her with a fear of water that stayed with her for years. Andrews was visibly shaken by what happened. It was the kind of moment that reminds everyone on a film set that no amount of planning fully controls what actually occurs when the cameras are rolling. But of all the things that went wrong during production, the most unexpected chaos came not from weather or danger or difficult personalities. It came from the lighting equipment inside a gazebo at night. The romantic scene between Maria and Captain Von Trapp, the moment they finally acknowledge their feelings for each other beneath soft moonlight, is remembered by audiences as one of the most tender and beautifully composed sequences in the film. The lighting gives it a dreamlike, glowing quality. The silhouettes of the two leads against the lit windows of the gazebo create an image that feels almost painterly. What almost no one knew for decades was that none of that was the original plan. The scene was designed to be shot with large industrial carbon arc lights, the kind used at the time to simulate moonlight. These machines were powerful, effective, and extremely loud, and the sound they made, particularly when they warmed up or fluctuated, was unfortunately, undeniably, and completely unavoidably hilarious. Every time Christopher Plummer moved in close to Julie Andrews to deliver a line or attempt the scene's romantic conclusion, the lights responded with a sound that dissolved every ounce of professional composure either of them had. The crew was equally helpless. Take after take collapsed into laughter. The more they tried to push through it, the worse it got. There is something about a solemn romantic moment being punctuated by a noise like that, over and over again, that bypasses every instinct to stay focused. Andrews later recalled trying 20 times without success. She described the experience years afterward on television, laughing at the memory of trying to hold a serious expression while the equipment beneath them produced sounds that belonged in a comedy, not a love scene. The director eventually abandoned the original approach entirely. He switched to silhouette lighting, positioning the actors against the glowing windows so that their expressions, and their laughter, would be hidden in shadow. What looked like a deliberate and elegant artistic choice was actually a creative solution to an absurd mechanical problem. The studio made sure the story did not get out. The cast and crew were expected to keep it quiet, and for a long time they did. Christopher Plummer's experience on that production was complicated in ways that went far beyond one chaotic evening in a gazebo. He was deeply uncomfortable with the material throughout filming. He found the sentiment excessive and the tone relentlessly upbeat in ways he could not personally connect with. He referred to the film in unflattering terms privately and kept a certain emotional distance from the project even as he showed up every day and delivered the work. He later admitted in his memoir that alcohol played a significant role in getting him through certain scenes, that some of the most emotionally weighty moments in the film were performed while he was not entirely sober. The farewell performance scene, which carries enormous dramatic weight and moved audiences around the world, was one of them. There is a painful irony in the fact that a scene celebrated for its emotional authenticity was achieved partly through the haze of something that had nothing to do with acting craft. There was another blow to Plummer's professional pride that he carried quietly. The singing in the film, specifically the sustained polished vocal performances attributed to his character, was not entirely his. A professional singer named Bill Lee, who had contributed vocal work to animated Disney productions, handled the parts that required the kind of trained range the studio was not confident Plummer could deliver. Plummer's speaking voice carries through the film, and his presence in the musical numbers is real, but the full vocal performance audiences heard was a collaboration he had not invited. He was unhappy about it. He felt it undermined something. And yet the blending was so seamless that decades passed before most viewers had any reason to suspect it. What is remarkable, looking back at all of this, is how thoroughly the finished film hides everything that went wrong during its creation. The Sound of Music does not look like a production that nearly drowned a child, flattened its lead actress repeatedly with helicopter wind, lost weeks to rain, nearly lost its male lead entirely, and could not complete a single romantic scene without the entire crew falling apart. It looks composed, warm, and inevitable, as if everything unfolded exactly as planned. That gap between what audiences see and what actually happened is one of the great illusions Hollywood ever pulled off. The film was released in 1965, and the response was unlike almost anything the industry had experienced. Within 18 months it had surpassed the previous record holder at the worldwide box office, a record that had stood for nearly 3 decades. It won 5 Academy Awards. It was seen by a number of people that is almost impossible to comprehend, in countries where audiences did not even speak the language. Songs from the film became part of a shared global vocabulary in a way that no marketing campaign could manufacture. People went back to see it again and again, sometimes dozens of times. A film that the studio had quietly feared might finish them became the thing that saved them. The secrets started coming out slowly, the way they usually do. Cast members grew older. The obligation to protect the studio's image began to feel less pressing. Julie Andrews, who had lived through the helicopter and the gazebo and the lake and all the rest of it, began speaking more openly in interviews and on television. She told the story of the lights in the gazebo with obvious delight, laughing at the memory of trying to stay serious under those circumstances. Each revelation added a layer to a story people thought they already knew completely. What these stories reveal, taken together, is something genuinely worth holding on to. The Sound of Music endures not because its production was smooth or its creation was painless. It endures because the people involved brought enormous skill and dedication to something that was, at almost every stage, more difficult than it looked. The accidents became art. The failures became solutions. The misery of one lead actor was transformed into one of cinema's most beloved performances. The chaos in the gazebo produced one of the most romantic images the film contains. None of that was accidental in the end. It was the result of professionals under pressure making the best possible decisions with what they had. The forbidden scenes, the buried stories, the secrets the studio spent years trying to contain, they do not diminish the film. If anything, they make it more remarkable. Because now you know what it actually